What's up everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, and I hope that you're ready for another episode of the Leaf podcast. This episode is going to be about local legends, tall tales, and that kind of thing, since we're so close to Halloween. And, of course, later on in the video, I will get in as to what I'm doing for Halloween, or not what I'm doing, what's going on the channel for Halloween. But anyways, this episode, like I said, is going to be about tall tales, local legends, and that kind of stuff, because those are some of my favorite types of tales to hear this time of year. Now, I did look up what tall tales means in other parts of Canada, other parts of the world, the US, and all that to see if they're similar so nobody gets confused. And I say this because I think it was earlier this year I did a video where I said on the job, and apparently in quite a few other places, on the job means to have intimate time with your significant other. So, did not know that, but now I do. Around here though, a tall tale is basically a story that the people telling it profess to be true beyond a shadow of a doubt. But to somebody who's not involved in the story and to somebody who's just hearing it, you're like, damn, did that really happen? But yeah, no more talking, let's just get right into it with one of these really odd stories that I found. Let me see if I can spin one of my uncle's yarns. I remember this one story that he told me about funerals. Just to avoid confusion, I'm going to refer to everyone by these names: Great-Grandma Dorothy, Uncle, Grandpa, and Grandma, and Miss Clementine. Again, this is a tall tale told by my uncle, but he says it's 100% true. So when my uncle was still young, Great-Grandma Dorothy passed away. Everyone had been dreading her death, not only because they loved her, which they did, but because she had requested a traditional funeral, which for them is a lot of work. But in accordance with her wishes, Grandpa and Grandma held a wake in their home and invited everybody. All the women brought flowers and watched over the body in shifts. This was done for 24 hours. All of the doors and windows had to remain open the whole time, so the men watched the house during that time to keep the animals from wandering in. Meanwhile, a couple of the men worked on making a simple coffin. After 24 hours, they laid Great-Grandma Dorothy's body in the coffin and said a short prayer. Then, they lugged the coffin out of the house. The men carried it to the family plot where Great-Grandpa was buried and laid Great-Grandma Dorothy to rest beside him. And that was that. Or, so they thought. Not long after this, Grandpa starts complaining that he's getting attacks. These attacks are of the old hag. If you don't know what that is, it's sort of like sleep paralysis, only you physically feel like somebody is sitting on your chest and you can't breathe or move. This turns into a nightly occurrence. They get worse over time, until one night, Grandma wakes up with Grandpa thrashing violently in bed next to her. But this time, he's moaning and shaking, and Grandma flips on the light to find that his face is turning blue. She immediately screams at the top of her lungs and starts praying. She thinks that Grandpa's a goner. But then suddenly he takes a huge gasp of air and stops shaking. They both manage to calm down a bit. By this point, Uncle is wide awake, standing in their doorway. He listens as Grandpa describes the encounter with the old hag. He's still shaking a bit as he talks. He said that while he struggled to breathe, he saw an apparition watching him from the corner of his room. It was Great-Grandma Dorothy. Grandma instantly freaks out when she hears this. She was incredibly superstitious and decides that they need to talk to Miss Clementine right away. I don't know what you would call Miss Clementine really. Uncle just called her a wise woman. She was old as dirt too, and lived alone in this tiny house out in the woods, way off from everyone else. My uncle, being the oldest of the kids, gets sent off to ask for her advice. So now it's the dead of night. Uncle has just heard that Great-Grandma Dorothy is apparently back from beyond the grave, and he's trudging out in the middle of nowhere, heading even further and further out into the sticks. Needless to say, he was thoroughly spooked by the time he finally finds Miss Clementine's house. He manages to get there without anything crazy happening, but damned if the old lady's not expecting him. She's standing right in her doorway, with her hands on her hips, like Uncle's late. Then she tells him what's been going on. Apparently Great-Grandma Dorothy's been appearing to her for the past few nights, and the two have been doing some talking. Your folks botched the funeral, Miss Clementine says. My uncle, confused, says how? Miss Clementine rambles in her creaky voice. Well, they had the wake. That was good. And they built a decent coffin, which is only right. And they buried her in the family plot, as they should have. Uncle's wishing that he just stayed in bed during this. She continues, but they forgot one thing. You always carry the body out of the house, feet first. My uncle says, what? What happened? But according to Miss Clementine, Great-Grandma Dorothy's coffin had been carried out head first, which is apparently no good for a spirit. Head first always ensures a haunting, she says, but this is easy enough to fix. So she explains to Uncle what he has to do. Then he hurries back home and tells his parents what Mrs. Clementine told him. Fast forward a week and the whole family is back at the house. The women, the men, my grandpa, and my uncle all go down to Great-Grandma Dorothy's grave. Together, the men open the grave back up until the coffin is exposed. Then, Grandpa passes around a bowl of salt, and everyone takes turns, sprinkling a bit over the coffin. Even my dad, who was only a wee lad at the time, remembers this bit. Then, the men fill in the grave, and everyone disperses back to their homes. After that, there were no more apparitions, there was no more old hag, and no more traditional funerals. But Uncle took a valuable lesson away from the event. This is the point where he'd lean in close and whisper the words, "Don't F with the dead, kiddo." So a lot of times, a story of this type is what we would consider a tall tale where I'm from. And now, the thing that makes it a tall tale is that the characters' names change. Even though the story really happened to like a certain family, sometimes people adopt it because they forget the names and just add in new ones, and then that version of the story gets passed down. But the core of the story, the things that happen, are still the same. Another example is one that I've never told on the channel before, but it's been a legend around my area for I don't know how long. So, the railroad used to come right through my area and had several stops. Of course it doesn't anymore since the 1970s, I believe, when they ripped the tracks up. So now it's more of a walking ATV trail, skidoo trail, and that kind of thing. So the story is that there was an undertaker who was walking on the tracks home. It was very late one night. He just had to bury a body. Now, that part of the story, or who he buried, isn't really ever mentioned or told. It's just said that he was an undertaker and he buried a body and it was late at night. Why you're burying a body late at night, I don't know. But according to undertakers I've talked to, you kind of have to be a little odd to be an undertaker anyways, so I just take that for what it is. Anyways, he's walking home, or walking back to wherever he's staying for that night, and then two men who work on the train approach him. These two men are extremely drunk, and they're both the bully kind of type. So they see this guy walking by himself. So of course they think to harass the lad for more money to go buy more alcohol. So what ends up happening is that after he says no, I don't know how many times he said no, but they were like, okay, screw you, and then they walked off. But they followed him, and as he got up the tracks further into a part of the tracks where there's not really a whole lot of light, kind of in the woods, they attacked him from behind, and then they took the round-mouthed shovel that he had, and they cut off his head with it. So now, this many 150 years later, or 100 years later or something, you can sometimes see a man with a lantern walking across the bridge. The lantern is swinging with his steps, and his steps are more of a stagger because he's apparently walking without a head. As for the two men, well, this is where the story changes. They're not really mentioned after what happened in the original versions that I've heard. But apparently in other versions, they die violently in some way, they become cursed, and in another version, they just get caught and get sentenced to death. Now, personally, the reason why I bring this one up is that I always took this as one of the tales that every community with railroad tracks was probably going to have. So, as an edgy teenager, I went out to this train bridge and I decided to just wait there, just to see if anything was going to happen. And then, as I was waiting, I did not check the weather that night and a thick fog rolled in. Usually the fog really only covers the river, but this time it seemed to come up on the bridge too, which was extremely eerie. It didn't help that on the other side of the train bridge it's more of like a older residential area, and they had those amber streetlights. So everything was really looking like a old 80s horror movie there. So I stayed there for as long as I could, waiting to see if anything would happen. And for the longest time, nothing did. Until I was just about to leave, and I was like, okay, it's just a story. There's nothing wrong with that, or maybe it just didn't happen here. Maybe it happened downriver, upriver. There's stops all over the place, or there were. So it could be still from the area, just not here. And as I was about to leave, I suddenly hear footsteps on the bridge. And at night, this is uncommon, but it's not out of the realm of possibility for somebody else to be weird like me and be out on the bridge looking for something creepy to happen. You really never know who you're going to meet in an area like this. But the more I thought that it was just a person out for a late night walk, the more I realized that their footsteps were staggering. And I was like, okay, that's a little weird. So I decided to wait a little longer. And then I swear I saw the blinking, which I originally thought was a flashlight, but then I realized it was the flickering of a lantern. And this was coming from the opposite direction of the amber light in the residential area. This one was coming from the woods, which is where the trail goes through. Now, as soon as I saw this, I thought, oh shit. And I started to turn around and leave. And then it felt like almost, because I was only about 40 feet on this bridge, and it felt like that was the longest 40 feet of my life, and it felt like that whatever this thing was, or whether it was the ghost of this undertaker guy, was catching up to me, and I didn't know what was going to happen if he did. Now this is very random, but I was always told never to run from a ghost, because if you run, it's showing fear. It's showing that they can have power over you, so don't do that. So I just kind of speed walk, trying to get out of there as quick as I can, but not trying to, let on that I was afraid. So after I got off the bridge, and it just leads to a gravel trail. Like I said, there used to be railroad tracks, but now it's just an ATV walking trail. So it's just a gravel trail. I turn around, and the thing is still coming. So by this point, I'm like, okay, I'm off the bridge. I'm just going to run. So I ran. And then I ran all the way up this steep-ass hill. My calves were burning, my back was hurting, my thighs were burning, and everything. And I looked back down, and this thing, whatever it was, stopped right at the bridge, disappeared, and started back at the other end of the bridge again. It was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. So if anybody was interested, maybe sometime I can just go there at night and see what happens. Now, there are a lot of four-wheelers this time of year, so we'll have to see. Maybe if I see any, they'll agree to an interview about weird shit they've seen. But, I don't know, that's just an idea that I thought of right now. But let me know if your community has any kind of odd stories like that. And now, I have some more stories. You probably thought that since it was getting to be 15-20 minutes that this was going to be over. Oh no, it's not over yet. This next one is from Newfoundland, Canada. He says, I have a really bizarre, creepy story that's been passed down in my family regarding a relative who went missing and then died under mysterious circumstances over a century ago. It briefly made the news when it happened, but as far as I can research, the news barely goes into depth beyond woman goes missing, turns up in her garden 4 years later. So instead, this story is passed down in the family. It was 1917 in Plate Cove, a very rural and undeveloped part of Newfoundland, Canada. An old relative goes missing for 4 years. She apparently was heavily superstitious. She believed in all manner of cryptids, fairies, demons, and other things. She was heavily into various European folklore. She's described as having all of these weird mannerisms, routines, and daily rituals to protect her and her family and pay respect to the fairies. Not only did she believe in them, she apparently claimed that she would encounter the fairies when out in the forest. The family generally considered her a lunatic. And then, she disappeared. Her disappearance was apparently a big deal at the time. There was a massive operation to find her. People from the town and neighboring communities were involved. But nobody found her. The search was called off. We go forward 4 years, and her body is found in her garden, but in pristine condition, like she had only been dead for a day. She was wearing her dress, which looked completely normal and not worn down or torn or even dirty. There were no injuries or signs of any trauma on her body. She was resting on her back with her arms gracefully crossed on her chest. Nobody knows what the hell happened to her. Police just spitball a theory that she was either abducted or ran away, died, and returned to her house by a third party. Our family insists that something paranormal happened to her, claiming that she was spirited away by the fairies. Today, the family and locals in her town call her the Fairy Lady. So I have heard this story before. I don't know if any of you have, but it's kind of a common-ish story in the Maritimes in Canada. It was honestly really cool to see it come from a family member of the person who it happened to. And one thing that's interesting is that when I was a kid, I used to see fairy circles. I didn't know what they were, but I was told by, grandparents, elderly people, great-grandparents at the time, that I should just not walk inside them. They said that nothing would probably happen, just in case. Which in my family and my community, when they tell you not to do something just in case, it means that they don't really believe that something's going to happen. But, on the off chance that something does happen, just don't do that. Now, a bit of a funny story about, fairy circles and all that, and I just thought of this right now. When I was a kid, I had some older cousins that I was down at my family member's house, and they were all down there too. It was a whole family get-together. And I think at one point, one of them, the boy or the girl, stepped inside a fairy circle. And, siblings being siblings, when nothing happened, one said to the other, "See, even the fairies don't want you." And I thought that at the time was the biggest roast ever. I thought it was hilarious. And now this next one. He says, "I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. There was less than 1,000 people in it. Next to my hometown, literally 10 minutes away, is a town called Winfield. There was a high school there. I think it's abandoned now. That was pretty large. The principal had an infant son that passed away, and he looked to an alien cult called the Raelians to clone his son in part of the chemistry wing of the school, which he cordoned off. Eventually, the feds got wind of it and shut it down. One day, my friend told me that he was walking around a pond near his house, and he saw a mass of people in black robes gathered around it and chanting. I have no clue if it's related, but I have a hard time thinking that it's not. I wonder if they managed to do anything in my area without getting caught. DuPont used to have plenty of plants down there. Maybe that would attract them for whatever else they planned to do. Plus, the general isolation of the area. Everyone knows about the Mothman now too, but not many people know about Indrid Cold. He showed up to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, about a week before the Mothman did. People claimed that he could communicate telepathically, and they could communicate with him, and he could turn a room cold just by being in it. He had a weird sheen to his skin, and spoke with a cadence that sounded like he didn't speak English very well, a very odd accent. Eventually, the family that fostered him got visited by men in black. Talk to old-timers today in the area, and they say that they may have met him. So has anyone in the comments ever heard about this? Has anyone ever heard of the Raelians or Indrid Cold? As of right now, this is my first mention of hearing it. I feel like I remember hearing it somewheres a long time ago. I was probably doing something else while listening to a video about something, and it was mentioned, but I'll have to look into it and see what's all going on there. And now this one comes from Wales in the UK. I was 19 years old. I was spending a lot of time with just me and my friends hanging out in each other's cars late at night. I enjoy taking creepy walks at night as well. One night, we decided to go to the beach at 2 a.m. Now this is a heavily commercialized beach. There's nothing inherently creepy about it. It stretches out around 2 miles. We decide to take a walk down through there. So we're just goofing around, fighting in the sand, bros being bros. We're walking along this beach for 5 minutes, and we hit an area that's very duny. We see a bunch of orange lights in the far distance, about half a mile away. The area of the beach is mostly unused apart from the odd dog walker, right next to a chemical plant. The lights begin to flicker. I start to get a little freaked out. I decide to push on further, but me and my bros are mostly quiet now. As we get closer, we realize that these lights are moving. Not just moving, but in some kind of rhythm. A few friends want to leave, but I encourage and push them forward. As we get really close, we huddle down behind a big sand dune and peer out from the corner of it. We're only about 200 feet away now, and we can see it clearly. There's about 8 to 9 people dressed in red, holding torches. Actual torches. It's fairly windy, so we can't hear anything. We're surprised that the torches were even lit. We're all watching in complete silence, occasionally looking at each other in awe. I couldn't believe it. It looked like some outrageous, cliché cult. After about 5 minutes of watching them stand there and move their torches rhythmically, they stop moving. My heart begins to sink. I just stand still for about 2 minutes. All their torches go out at the same time. It's so dark that we can't see them anymore. Me and my friends book it out of there and go back to the car, terrified. Still not sure what we were looking at. We talk about it from time to time, but it really freaked out one of my friends who was convinced that he was being followed by said cult weeks after it. Now I'm not sure about anybody else, but I don't wonder what it is about small areas having a cult-like presence in them. I've even been to places that I didn't see anybody, but I could hear things and there were traces of cult-like activity. So I think I may have told this before years ago, but one time me and a friend were driving on this really long, kind of unpaved dirt road, and what we find on a power pole is we find a deer nailed to a tree. Now, of course, we're like, what the hell? But we get out because he wants to look at it and check it over for some morbid reason. So the first thing that we notice is that the deer is nailed to this pole with a railroad spike. Where they got a railroad spike all the way out there, I don't know, and I probably don't want to know. And then there's this little path that seems to just kind of go around a bend in the woods. And after that, there's a big clearing with a kind of a gravel hill of some sort. And I realized very quickly that what we're standing on is not just gravel, but it's shotgun shells. And there are hundreds or thousands of them. Now, of course, it's very possible that the area we were at happened to be a spot where people go for target practice. We didn't see any targets, but that doesn't mean that they weren't there. And being this far out in the woods, it was probably a safe place. But then we found some other stuff. We found what looked like some kind of rudimentary shelter. We found a bonfire that it was still warm, so the people were probably still around. And we saw this weird black little mini cauldron on it. I was hoping that it was going to be just for soup or chili, but there was paper and there was bones and stuff in it. And then through the woods we can hear chanting, and this chanting is getting closer. So right then we decide that we don't want to find out who who exactly is out here doing this chanting in the middle of the day, so we just leave. And generally, I've never been back there since, and I don't really plan to go back there, to be honest. But enough of that. This next story is really bizarre as well. This guy says that he was driving home around 1 a.m. in very rural Pennsylvania. He said that there was always this story of the beast, that they called it. He never really believed it because he had never seen anything, and by this point, he had been working night shift for a long time. So he says he comes up on this large hill. This hill was a couple miles from home. On one side there was some trees and brush, and on the other was a massive crop field. He says that right before he got to the top, he began to slow down for this really sharp turn. And then, right at the bend, he sees a large, about 5 to 6 feet long and 3 to 4 feet tall, snow-white colored animal that looks like some kind of big cat at a glance. It sprints across the road and into the field fast enough that he can't react enough to get a very good look. But he stops the car and turns it around so the headlights are pointed into the field. And what he sees looking back at him is what he can only describe as a lizard head or some kind of reptilian head. He said that the thing and him seemed to stare at each other, but he thinks that the lizard thing was looking more at the headlights of his vehicle, and then it steps just out of the crops enough for him to see how big this thing is. It turns out that it was just running on all fours. It stands up, and it's much taller than he thought it was. It then turns around and sprints off into the field, just like a lizard would on 2 legs. So what do you think that was? What do you think was going on here? Where do you think it was going? Of course, let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know if your community, your city, your town, whatever, wherever you live, has any kind of crazy stories like this. They're always super interesting to hear. And as for Halloween, so far the plans are to have a podcast video, which I'll be telling this really wild story that I've been saving since April, I think, to do a video on it. I just never quite knew where to fit it in, but all the more reason to do it on the podcast, right? And I'll also probably have some kind of compilation video up. And if you haven't noticed already, I have a new playlist. I have a podcast playlist. I think it might show up as a podcast on YouTube Music. I'm not sure because I've gotten conflicting information on that. And I'll probably make a playlist for the compilations. I'll probably divide them up better just so that you don't have to sift through 300 videos to find one that you're looking for on a specific topic. But that's going to take a little bit of time because I'm just one guy. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. And if you did, I hope you like and subscribe. And I will see you Sunday, I guess. If you want to support the channel, there's a new feature called a hype feature that I think will let more people get recommended the video. I think that's how it works. I'm not really sure. Some people have it, some people don't. But as always, I'll be very grateful if you were to hype one of my videos. If you want to donate to the channel, there's links in the description. Here on YouTube, there's memberships and super thanks. And yeah, you know the rest of it. I will see you Sunday. And Sunday's video, I think, is going to be about the Great White North, Canada. So make sure to tune in for that one. And I'll see you then. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.